why you think it's a good idea to give tax breaks to billionaires and allow 50,000 low-income and working-class people to die unnecessarily?
You all had a scheduled expiration of Obamacare subsidies, and you did not extend that when you were in charge.
Bernie Sanders walked into that Senate hearing thinking he had an easy target, another chance to grandstand about billionaires, another opportunity to lecture Americans about inequality while he owns 3 houses. But what happened next absolutely blindsided him. Scott Bessent didn't just push back. He systematically dismantled every single argument Bernie tried to make, exposing the massive hypocrisy that Democrats have been hiding for years. And by the end, you could see it in Bernie's face. The frustration, the anger, the moment he realized he had nothing left. But here's what makes this story even more explosive. This wasn't just about one heated exchange. This was about exposing the entire facade that progressive politicians have been selling to the American people for decades. And you're about to see exactly how it all fell apart, piece by piece, in real time. Now, before we dive into the most devastating moments of this confrontation, you need to understand what Bernie was really trying to do here. Because on the surface, it looked like he was fighting for working Americans. But the truth? It's far more calculated than that. And once you see the pattern, you'll never look at these Senate hearings the same way again. Let me set the stage for you. The Senate Finance Committee, cameras rolling. Bernie Sanders, the self-proclaimed champion of the working class, sitting there with his prepared talking points about tax breaks for billionaires. Across from him, Scott Bessent, nominee for Treasury Secretary, a man who actually understands how the economy works. And Bernie thought this would be just another viral clip for his social media team. A few sound bites about evil billionaires. Maybe trend on Twitter for a day or two. But what he got instead was a masterclass in how facts destroy narratives. Here's how Bernie opened his attack. He starts asking about billionaires in the Trump administration. 13 of them, he claims. Already you can see where he's going with this. He's setting up his favorite boogeyman, the wealthy elite controlling government. It's the same script he's been reading from for 40 years. But watch what happens when he tries to connect this to actual policy. Bernie zeroes in on the estate tax. $235 billion in tax breaks, he says, going to the top 0.2%. And he asked Bessent point blank, "Don't you think it's suspicious that all these billionaires in government are pushing for this?" It's a gotcha question, the kind designed to make the person squirm. Admit you're helping the rich or look like you're dodging the question. But here's where Bessent does something Bernie wasn't expecting. He answers honestly. When the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act passed, his own tax rate went up. Now Bernie tries to brush this off. Says he doesn't know Bessent's exact situation, because of course he doesn't. That would require actually listening instead of waiting for his next talking point. And this is where you start to see the cracks forming in Bernie's strategy. Let me explain something that Bernie conveniently leaves out every single time he rants about the estate tax. The current exemption is $15 million per individual, $30 million for a married couple, and it adjusts for inflation every year. Now, Bernie wants you to believe this is about protecting billionaires. But here's the reality that he'll never admit. Billionaires don't even touch the estate tax. They've already moved their wealth into trusts, foundations, and offshore structures long before they die. You know who the estate tax actually hits? Family businesses, farms, small companies where all the value is tied up in equipment, land, and inventory. People who spent their entire lives building something, only to have the government swoop in and take 40% of it the moment they pass away. Their kids are forced to sell, take out massive loans, sometimes lose the whole business just to pay a tax bill. And Bernie knows this. He just doesn't care, because admitting it would destroy his entire narrative. But wait, it gets so much better, because Bernie realizes his estate tax attack isn't working. Bessent isn't taking the bait. So Bernie does what every politician does when they're losing an argument. He changes the subject entirely. And this is where the real fireworks begin. This is where Bessent drops the bomb that Bernie has been dreading for years. Bernie pivots to Medicaid. $700 billion in cuts, he claims. 15 million people losing health insurance. And then he throws out this number. 50,000 people will die every year. Let that sink in for a moment. 50,000 deaths. That's what Bernie is accusing the Trump administration of causing. It's emotional manipulation at its finest. How can anyone defend a policy that kills 50,000 people? Except here's the problem. The number is completely manufactured. It's based on assumptions, stacked on top of assumptions, using projections that even the experts who created them admit could be 25% off in either direction. A UC Berkeley health policy professor reviewed these estimates and said flat out, this requires so many assumptions that the actual effect could be massively different. But Bernie doesn't mention that part. He just throws the scary number out there and hopes it sticks. And this is where Bessent absolutely destroys him. First, he calls out the inflated numbers. 5.1 million of those people losing coverage? That has nothing to do with this bill. Those are people on expiring Obamacare subsidies. Subsidies that, and this is the key part, Democrats themselves let expire. Bernie tries to interrupt, says it's a combination of factors, but Bessent doesn't let him off the hook. Here comes the moment that changed everything. Bessent looks Bernie right in the eye and says it. You had a scheduled expiration of Obamacare subsidies, and you did not extend them when you were in charge. The Democrats had full control. The White House, the Senate, the House. They could have passed anything they wanted, and they chose not to fix it. Why? Because even Democrats couldn't agree on it. The deficit it would create was so massive that members of their own party refused to vote for it. Let that sink in for a moment. Bernie Sanders is sitting in a Senate hearing, blaming Republicans for people losing health coverage when his own party had the power to prevent it and chose not to. And now he's caught, on camera, with nowhere to hide. You can see it in his face. The realization that he just got exposed in front of millions of people. But Bessent isn't done. He keeps going. Points out that 1.4 million of those Medicaid recipients, illegal aliens, people who shouldn't be on the program in the first place. And the rest? They're subject to work requirements, 80 hours a month. That's 20 hours a week. Not exactly a heavy burden, and those requirements come with exemptions for people who genuinely can't work. Students, caregivers, people with disabilities, the list goes on. Now you'd think Bernie would admit defeat here, acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, his numbers were off. But no, he doubles down. And this is where the exchange goes from heated to absolutely explosive. Because Bernie decides to play the sympathy card, and it backfires spectacularly. He starts asking about people who lose their jobs. 20 million people leave their jobs every year, he says. And he's right about that number. But watch how he tries to spin it. Someone leaves their job to take care of a sick family member. Are they lazy? Do they deserve to lose Medicaid? It's designed to make you feel bad, to make work requirements sound cruel and heartless. Except there's one tiny problem. Caregivers are explicitly exempted from the work requirements. It's right there in the legislation. Clear as day, anyone providing care for a family member doesn't lose coverage. Bernie either doesn't know this, which would make him incompetent, or he does know it and is lying anyway, which would make him dishonest. Either way, it's a devastating look. And here's what makes this even more infuriating. This isn't the first time Bernie has done this. For decades, he's been using the same playbook. Make wild claims about helping the working class, attack anyone who questions him as being in the pocket of billionaires, and hope that nobody actually checks the facts. But social media has changed the game. People can fact-check in real time now, and they did. Within hours of this hearing, the internet was flooded with breakdowns showing exactly where Bernie's numbers came from and why they were misleading. But let's go deeper, because this hearing exposed something far bigger than just one senator's dishonesty. It revealed the entire strategy that progressive politicians have been using for years. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Think about how Bernie structured his questions. He starts with something that sounds reasonable. Billionaires shouldn't get special treatment. Working people need health care. Who's going to disagree with that? Nobody. It's common sense. But then he sneaks in the lie. He connects those reasonable-sounding premises to policies that have nothing to do with them. The estate tax isn't about billionaires. The Medicaid work requirements aren't about denying coverage to caregivers. But by the time you realize you've been misled, he's already moved on to the next talking point. It's a rhetorical trick, and it works on people who aren't paying close attention. You end up nodding along, thinking Bernie is fighting for you, when in reality he's pushing policies that would devastate the economy and give government even more control over your life. And the media, they eat it up, because Sanders slams Trump nominee gets clicks. Nobody reads the follow-up story explaining that everything Bernie said was misleading. So here we are, Bernie Sanders, exposed in front of the entire country, his numbers debunked, his narrative shattered, and Scott Bessent standing there, calm and collected, armed with nothing but facts and logic. This is what happens when ideology meets reality, when feelings run into evidence. And Bernie had no response. None. You could see him fumbling through his notes, trying to find something, anything to recover from the humiliation. But it gets even better, Because after the hearing, the videos started spreading everywhere. Not the edited clips that Bernie's team wanted you to see, the full exchanges, the complete context. And people were furious. Conservatives, obviously, but also independents. Even some Democrats who were tired of being lied to. The comments sections were brutal. Thousands of people calling out the manipulation, sharing the exemptions Bernie conveniently ignored, breaking down the math that didn't add up. This is the power of transparency. When you can't control the narrative anymore, when people have access to the full story, the truth wins. And Bernie Sanders learned that lesson the hard way. Now let's talk about what this really means, because this hearing wasn't just about taxes and Medicaid, it was about trust, about whether the people who claim to represent you are actually telling you the truth. And Bernie Sanders failed that test spectacularly. For 40 years, he's built a brand around being the honest politician, the guy who tells it like it is, the one who fights for the little guy against the corrupt system. But when you actually examine his record, what do you find? A man who rails against millionaires while being one himself, who attacks billionaires while never accomplishing anything to actually limit their power, who had multiple chances to pass the progressive policies he claims to support, and couldn't get it done even with his own party in charge, and now caught on camera spreading misleading numbers to score political points. The mask slipped, and millions of people saw what was underneath. Not a champion of the working class, not a truth teller standing up to corruption, just another politician playing games while pretending to be above it all. Here's what Scott Bessent understood that Bernie Sanders doesn't. The American people aren't stupid. They can handle complexity. They can understand that tax policy involves trade-offs, that healthcare reform requires balancing costs and benefits, that work requirements can both encourage self-sufficiency and include exemptions for people who genuinely need help. You don't have to lie to them. You don't have to manipulate their emotions with fake death counts. But Bernie's entire political identity is built on being the angry outsider, the guy yelling about injustice. If he admitted that maybe, just maybe, some of these issues are more complicated than rich versus poor, his whole brand falls apart. So he can't do it. He's trapped by his own rhetoric. And moments like this hearing expose that trap for everyone to see. And let's be clear about something else. The estate tax debate isn't really about helping small businesses or protecting billionaires. It's about a fundamental question. When you die, does the government have the right to take half of what you built and give it to bureaucrats in Washington? You already paid taxes on that money when you earned it. You paid property taxes on it every year, sales taxes when you spent it, capital gains taxes if it grew. And now, after a lifetime of being taxed at every turn, the government wants one more bite when you're gone. That's not about fairness. That's about power, about keeping wealth from being passed down through families, about making sure that no matter how hard you work, how much you sacrifice, the government always gets its cut. And if that makes it harder for your children to keep the farm you spent 50 years building, well, that's just too bad. Bernie Sanders thinks that's justified, because in his world, accumulated wealth is inherently suspicious, inherently unfair, even if you earned every penny of it legally. But here's the thing that really exposes the hypocrisy. Bernie talks about the 0.2% like they're some alien species, these ultra-wealthy elites who are fundamentally different from regular Americans. But who are these people? They're business owners, entrepreneurs, people who took risks, worked insane hours, sacrificed time with their families to build something. Many of them started with nothing. Immigrant families who came to America with a dream and made it happen. And yes, some of them are now wealthy. Some of them are worth tens of millions or even hundreds of millions. But they got there by creating jobs, by providing products and services that people wanted, by growing the economy. And now Bernie wants to punish them for succeeding, wants to take what they built and redistribute it, not to the workers who helped create that wealth. They already got paid. Not to the customers who benefited from their products. They already got value. But to government bureaucrats who had nothing to do with creating any of it. That's not justice. That's not fairness. That's envy dressed up as policy. And the American people are smart enough to see through it, especially when someone like Scott Bessent calmly lays out the facts and lets the truth speak for itself. And then there's the Medicaid situation. Bernie's claim that 50,000 people will die. Let's think about that for a second. He's accusing the Trump administration of mass murder, of deliberately crafting a policy designed to kill Americans. That's not political disagreement. That's not a difference of opinion on the best way to provide health care. That's demonization. That's calling your opponents murderers. And for what? for implementing work requirements that say if you're a healthy adult, you should work 20 hours a week to get taxpayer-funded benefits. That's the killing policy Bernie is so outraged about, asking able-bodied people to contribute to society in exchange for society support. Apparently, that's now equivalent to murder. Do you see how insane this has become? How completely detached from reality these progressive talking points are? They've moved so far left that basic concepts like work requirements are treated as human rights violations. And when someone like Bessent points out the obvious, that Democrats had the chance to extend those Obamacare subsidies and chose not to, Bernie has no answer. Because there is no answer. His party made a political calculation, and now he's trying to blame Republicans for the consequences. This is why moments like this hearing matter so much, because they cut through the rhetoric and force politicians to defend their actual positions. Not the slogans, not the hashtags, the real policies with real consequences. And when that happens, you get to see who's been honest with you and who's been playing games. Scott Bessent came prepared with facts, with understanding of how tax policy actually works, with knowledge of what the legislation actually says. Bernie Sanders came with talking points and fake outrage. And when those two approaches collided, there was only one possible outcome. The truth won, as it always does when people are actually paying attention. Now, some people watching this might say, well, Bernie means well. He's just trying to help people. And maybe that's true. Maybe he genuinely believes that bigger government and higher taxes are the answer to every problem. But good intentions don't excuse dishonesty. They don't make it okay to spread misleading statistics about death counts. They don't justify accusing people of murder for implementing work requirements with exemptions for those who need them. At some point, you have to judge politicians not by what they say their intentions are, but by what they actually do. And what Bernie has actually done, over and over again, is mislead the American people to score political points. This hearing was just the latest example, the most public example, the one where he got caught so thoroughly that even his supporters had to admit something was off. You know what's interesting? The people who were most upset about this exchange weren't Republicans. We expect Bernie to pull stunts like this. It's his whole brand. No, the people who were really angry were the ones who had believed him, who thought he was different, who trusted that when Bernie Sanders said something, he'd at least done his homework. And then they watched this hearing and realized they'd been played. That's a betrayal that cuts deeper than any political disagreement, because it's not about left versus right. It's about honest versus dishonest. And Bernie proved which category he falls into, not through some gotcha moment or out-of-context clip, but through a straightforward exchange where he made specific claims, and those claims fell apart under the slightest scrutiny. Think about the implications here. If Bernie is willing to exaggerate, mislead, and distort the truth on something as verifiable as tax policy and Medicaid requirements, things that are written down in black and white that anyone can look up, what else has he been lying about? What other claims has he made over the years that sound good but don't hold up when you check the numbers? This is what happens when ideology becomes more important than truth. When winning the argument matters more than being right, when you're so convinced of your moral superiority that you think lying is justified if it advances your cause. Bernie Sanders has spent decades building a movement around this philosophy, and for a long time it worked, because the media wouldn't challenge him, because his supporters were more interested in the message than the facts. Because in politics, passion often beats precision. But we're living in a different era now. Information spreads too fast. Fact checks happen in real time. And when you get exposed as badly as Bernie did in this hearing, there's no putting that genie back in the bottle. The video exists. The transcript exists. The fact checks exist. And no amount of spin can change what actually happened. Scott Bessent didn't destroy Bernie Sanders with some clever trick or rhetorical flourish. He did it by simply telling the truth. By pointing out that Democrats let Obamacare subsidies expire, by noting that work requirements have exemptions, by explaining that the estate tax doesn't affect billionaires the way Bernie claims. Basic facts, stated clearly, and that was enough to dismantle everything Bernie tried to build. That should tell you something about the strength of progressive arguments when they're not protected by friendly media or carefully edited clips. They collapse under their own weight, because they're built on a foundation of emotion and resentment rather than logic and evidence. And when someone refuses to play along with that game, the whole thing falls apart. So where does this leave us? Bernie Sanders walked into that hearing expecting an easy win, a chance to grandstand for his base, maybe go viral on social media. What he got instead was a reality check, a reminder that facts matter, that you can't just make up statistics and expect everyone to accept them, that eventually someone will call you out. And when they do, you better have more than righteous indignation to back up your claims. Scott Bessent gave us all a blueprint for how to handle these situations. Stay calm. Stick to the facts. Don't get drawn into the emotional manipulation, and trust that the truth is powerful enough on its own. You don't need to yell. You don't need to perform outrage. You just need to know what you're talking about and be willing to say it clearly. This hearing wasn't just about taxes and healthcare. It was about whether we're going to have honest debates about policy or whether we're going to keep playing these games where politicians score points by distorting reality. And for one brief moment, honesty won. The American people got to see a real exchange of ideas, not sound bites and slogans, not rehearsed talking points designed to go viral, but an actual conversation where one person knew what he was talking about and the other person got exposed for winging it. We need more moments like this, more hearings where politicians are held accountable for the specific claims they make, more transparency so voters can see who's being straight with them and who's playing games. Because democracy only works when people have accurate information, when they can trust that their representatives are telling them the truth, even when that truth is complicated or doesn't fit neatly into a campaign slogan. Bernie Sanders failed that test. Scott Bessent passed it, and millions of Americans got to watch it happen in real time. That's the kind of accountability that makes our system work. Not when everyone agrees, but when people are forced to defend their positions with facts instead of feelings. When evidence matters more than ideology. When you can't just accuse your opponents of murder and expect everyone to nod along. This hearing matters because it showed what's possible when someone refuses to play the game, when they insist on actual debate instead of theatrical outrage. And the result was exactly what you'd expect. The person with facts on their side won. The person relying on misleading statistics and emotional manipulation lost. It's that simple. So the next time you hear Bernie Sanders or any politician making dramatic claims about how many people will die if we don't pass their preferred policy, remember this hearing. Remember how quickly those claims fell apart when someone actually challenged them. Remember that 50,000 death figure and how it was based on assumptions that even the researchers admitted might be wildly off. Remember Bernie's face when Bessent pointed out that Democrats let those Obamacare subsidies expire, because that's what accountability looks like. That's what happens when truth meets narrative and narrative loses. And we need to see a lot more of it if we're going to fix what's broken in our political system. The era of letting politicians get away with this nonsense is over. The American people are too informed now, too connected, too able to fact-check in real time. And senators like Bernie Sanders, who built their careers on emotional appeals rather than sound policy, are going to keep finding themselves in situations like this one. Exposed, embarrassed, unable to defend claims that sounded good in a campaign speech, but fall apart under scrutiny. That's a good thing. That's democracy working the way it's supposed to. Not perfectly, not without flaws, but better than the alternative where charismatic liars can say whatever they want without consequences. Scott Bessent did the country a service in that hearing room. He showed that you can push back against progressive orthodoxy without being cruel or dishonest. You just have to know your stuff and be willing to speak plainly. And Bernie Sanders, he showed us exactly why we can't trust politicians who build their brand on anger and resentment. Because when it comes time to actually defend their positions with facts and logic, they've got nothing. Just more outrage, more accusations, more attempts to change the subject and hope nobody notices. We noticed. Millions of us noticed. And we're not going to forget. If this breakdown opened your eyes to how political theater really works, then do me a favor. Share this with someone who needs to see it. Leave a comment letting me know what you think about Bernie's tactics and whether Scott Bessent handled it the right way. And if you want more content that cuts through the noise and gives you the straight story, hit that subscribe button right now, because we're just getting started. There are a lot more moments like this that deserve this kind of analysis. A lot more politicians who need to be held accountable, and a lot more truth that needs to be told. The mainstream media won't do it. They're too invested in protecting certain narratives. But we will, every single time, no matter who it embarrasses or what sacred cows we have to challenge. Because at the end of the day, you deserve the truth, not spin, not propaganda, not carefully edited clips designed to make you feel a certain way. The actual truth, even when it's complicated, even when it doesn't fit neatly into your preferred political worldview, that's the commitment we're making to you. And if that sounds like something you can get behind, then welcome aboard. We've got a lot of work to do. a lot of lies to expose, a lot of politicians to hold accountable. And it all starts with moments like this Senate hearing where the mask slipped and we got to see what's really going on behind all the rhetoric.